Imelda is a Mary Ward sister with the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary Congregation. In a recent interview with The Tablet, she described her congregation as totally apostolic, with mission being the driving force and central to the charism. After working in education for a number of years, this commitment to mission took her and a fellow sister to the Clarences, one of the most socially deprived housing estates in the northeast of England. Their pastoral and spiritual work within this community over many years supported families and individuals in their struggles against poverty and despair. By the time they left, the sense of community, mutual support, and self-help was strong on the estate, supported by an ecumenical church presence, local clinic, and social centre established by the sisters. When the time came to move on, Imelda joined the rest of her order in a period of reflection as to how they could establish communities outside their current boundaries. This discernment led the English IBVM province and Imelda and another sister, Nora, to Albania, where the Archbishop of Tirana talked with them about the serious problem of young girls and women being trafficked across Albanian borders and into other European countries. After a period of preparation, Imelda and Nora arrived in Tirana in 2005. They began their work in Albania under the auspices of Caritas, which provided them with some essential funding to get started. Sadly, Nora had to return to the UK within 6 months due to a serious heart condition. Imelda continued developing mission with the opening of a Caritas shelter for trafficked victims, and also traveling all over the country, visiting even the remotest regions in the mountains, coordinating the diocesan clinics, and learning all the time about the social conditions which have led to the exploitation of women and the high levels of human trafficking. Eventually, she and her Albanian Mary Ward companions set up a new Albanian non-governmental organization under the name of her religious order's founder, Mary Ward, in order to concentrate on the issue of human trafficking full-time. This organization now works to address the root causes of trafficking in Albania, including poverty and high unemployment amongst men and women, and is involved in the rescue and rehabilitation of trafficked victims. It was during the early years of the NGO that Imelda was invited to an international symposium on human trafficking. Here, she learned how little was being done about this problem across most of Europe. The response of 5 European sisters present was to set up a foundation which became known as Religious in Europe Networking Against Trafficking and Exploitation. That's RENATE, abbreviated. Imelda has been the president of this foundation since it was first constituted as an NGO under the Dutch law, and many initiatives have now been developed across Europe. Over time, Imelda's work against human trafficking in Europe drew the attention of Pope Francis, who has a particular concern for this problem. She has met with him on a number of occasions, including a private audience with 200 of the membership of RENATE, at which she made a presentation on the issue and later answered questions about her work. In 2018, her work against human trafficking was recognised by the Queen in England with the award of an MBE. She accepted this on behalf of all those who've been working so hard with her to combat human trafficking. She's now preparing to step down from her presidency of RENATE in 2022, but her work to combat human trafficking will continue through advocacy and grassroots ministry in Albania and across Europe. The title of her talk today is Walking with Francis Towards an Inclusive, Status-Free Church. I'm now delighted to introduce Sister Imelda.
Okay, hello everybody again. Thank you, Kerry. That was such an introduction. My goodness me. Anyway, it's lovely to have you and me here, both Pools. Yeah, amazing. But absolutely great to meet all of you new people that I've never met before online, and some old friends like Patricia and Patricia. the two Patricias that are here. So such a delight to be with you on this sunny day. It is a real privilege and honor. I have met the core group of Root and Branches and had the most amazing conversation with them. I was inspired, I was challenged, and well, what can I say is that it's just lovely to see you again and to be with you in this very honored and privileged setting to speak with you about our struggles towards freedom, I think we might say. You know, I'm not an academic, I'm not a theologian, but I have passion, and a lot of it. And I especially have passion about women's rights and about abuse of women, which is my mission that I was called into probably since I was born. And so I walk with you today. And I think I would like to invite you to make this webinar a little bit different. It's like a journey together, and it's a journey of the mind and the heart and the soul, the deepest sensing in you, where the Holy Spirit is inspiring and desiring in you towards change. So if you like, this is a little mini retreat together. The title of this organization, or the name of it, Root and Branches, is very, very particular in the light of the soul of a human being. That we're born with that seed, which has the potential beyond anything we could ever imagine. Just like the seed of a flower, the seed of a lamb, the seed of a tree. And you know, in the SDGs number 5, we have a human right to become the person we were born to become. So I begin this webinar, this input, by, if you like, inviting us all to dream with Pope Francis, his latest book, Let Us Dream. It's something about desiring. And if we can get to the heart of our desiring, we will get to the heart of God's willingness. And then we have nothing but incredible strength and passion to follow that goal. And nothing will stop us because it's God's will. So if you like, today we're discerning a little bit the next step forward. I've divided this input into 4 parts, and we're going to have a little break between each part, and it will go quite swiftly through. So the first part is a kind of a skating through history of women in the church, women in the world. What has been our status? Have we been included at all? Have we been in any way treated with equal status throughout history? And we begin with the Bible, if you like, pre-Jesus times to Jesus, and then a sweep into history, globally, locally, and in the church. That's the first part. The second, we will look at the core process of Pope Francis as Jesuit, in how he comes to his touching his deepest desiring, both individually and corporately, through discernment. And we'll look at corporate discernment to see if we can find a strategy in parallel with Pope Francis to find our best way forward according to God's will. The third stage of this, and we're going to have little chats between each one. The third stage is looking at what, how we can really define, if you like, the foci of Pope Francis that he has discerned are needed to move forward with change in the church. And then finally, we're going to look at ourselves and to see how we tune in with that and how we can walk with Pope Francis towards transformation to get gender equality and human rights for women in the church, walking alongside Pope Francis. Okay, so now I'm going to show you, share with you the PowerPoint, which will slip through quite easily, I hope. So this first picture is very important for beginning our dreaming. I've actually chosen a quote from the website of Root and Branches as a good starter for this input. We must not let the current clarifying moment pass us by. Let it not be said in years to come that in response to the coronavirus crisis, we failed to act to restore the dignity of our peoples, to recover our memory, and to remember our roots. Let us dream. The book in which we are invited to move into this discernment process with Pope Francis towards an inclusive, status-free church. And here you have a very beautiful image of this. We have two trafficked girls who met Pope Francis in one of our smaller meetings, and he knew them before he was Pope as children, and he knew their mothers, their families. So it's like meeting friends, but meeting them in a time when they're coming back to life after abuse. And you can see that Pope Francis is treating them as equals, as women. And we want to feel that our future church will be that kind of church. But let's go back in time. We know from the Bible stories that, you know, right through really until probably the 19th century, the whole world was driven by patriarchy, and probably still is actually. But there were always women figures right through history that stood out as women of courage, as women as leaders, as women with a strong voice of justice and peace. And we think of Deborah, who urged her husband Barak to, yes, it was warmongering, but it was for justice. And Barak said, no, I can't go without you. So she went too. And together, man and woman, they found the peace that they were seeking. We have Esther, who prevented a genocide in the book of Esther. We read of this. We go forward to the gospel, and here we have this beautiful image of the woman at the well. And we have Jesus thirsty, tired. The apostles had gone off, his followers, to get some food. And he has no thought of what people would think in that time of being unclean as a Jew or whatever. He asked her for a drink. And in this amazing image, we have a sort of drawing of unity between man and woman. And they're both holding the water together. They are, as it were, quenching each other's thirst. In different ways, we know Jesus was giving her the water of life, and she was giving him also the water of life, but in real water terms. A wonderful image of how we hope the Catholic Church will be in time to come. And right up to the present, we've got women seeking equality together. And this is the key that we'll be moving into more and more, that maybe our discernment today is leading us to speak with one mutual voice after really good and clear discernment. In church history, we have so many quotes right through in which the church has had to listen and has been called to listen to women through time. We have the wonderful story in the 6th century in England, when in fact the conversion of the pagans was being done within, if you like, the beginnings of a Celtic church. And Aidan was very significant in bringing Christianity to the north of England. Hilda, through war, intertribal war in England, had escaped to the south with her, where her sister was in East Anglia, and she had this strong call to religious life, and she was about to head to France, where her sister was in a closed monastery. And Aidan woke up to the fact that the church was failing in Northumbria for the lack of female leadership. He would call them within the Celtic scene foster mothers or spiritual mothers. And he called on Hilda, whom he had heard about, and invited her to come and co-lead the church with him in that burgeoning, new, exciting, dreaming of dreams to bring Jesus Christ to the pagan world of that time. And we know it led to Hilda leading a male and female monastery in Whitby, which led to the Synod of Whitby and the beginnings of the Roman Church throughout UK. On the other side of this picture, we have Saint Teresa of Avila. And she was very significant as a doctor of the church, later called, in ensuring that women had a soul, if you like, because Aquinas had in fact declared that women were defective. That was his word. And Teresa wrote a thesis about this, pronouncing with great theological credibility the fact that a human being, whether male or female, was born of God with a soul and equal in terms of dreaming to be holy. Now we come to my roots, if you like, as a Mary Ward woman. But I was born in the 20th century, and I was born in a Catholic family. My mother was a convert. But you know, from very, very baby age, I was born into a family tuned into social justice. And I was part of a choir. My dad was very musical. And I would be invited with my family, who were all in a little choir run by my father, who played the piano. And on Christmas time, Christmas morning, we would always go to the hospital to sing to the mothers having babies, because my father had a deep feeling that they must be very sad to be in hospital on such a day. Also, we were encouraged throughout our time to raise money for the less off in Africa. So I would be out snow sweeping from the age of 6 with my brothers and sisters to contribute to the pot, which was then given to the Archbishop of Birmingham on this very day, Good Shepherd Sunday, every year. So if you like, my history is like giving. I was always never felt different to my brothers in my family. I felt equally important. And my call to religious life was consequent to women who taught me in a Loreto school, who I felt were fully alive and happy, very joyful, and human to the fullest extent I could imagine. And that's what drew me to becoming a Mary Ward woman. Now, you know, some of you, that Mary Ward was born in 1585 and died in 1645, and was declared a heretic by the church. She was called after a call within a call to found a congregation for women based on the Ignatian constitutions. Apostolic religious, called to educate women, particularly in those times across Europe. But never did she get the permission fully through. But she was absolutely, totally, strongly committed to the fact that women in time to come will do much. So we sweep into the 17th and the 19th century, and we know we had the terrible French Revolution, but here we have a wonderful picture of how the women were asserting their rights for bread. And throughout that time, you know, women were emerging as the leaders of the family, but more than that, for justice. They were alongside their men. And then we have the whole history of the suffragettes. And if you like, this was the beginning of the sweep of women's voices being heard together. And it was within society, indeed. But, you know, the churches were also beginning to wake up, the different church traditions, to the role of women in the church by the 20th century, indeed. And some were further along the way than others, but the Methodists had their deaconesses long time ago, as did the Anglicans. And we know that now all of these Christian denominations do have ordained clergy. The thing about organizations, and I would encourage you to read a book by Frederick Laloux called Reinventing Organizations. And the thing about organizations is that transformation from what we call a totally patriarchal hierarchical model, which Frederick Laloux calls a red model of organizing, through to what he calls teal, which is self-managing teams, is a massive shift. And it took centuries to come to that. Mary Ward Loretto is slowly finding its way into organizing into self-managing teams as we speak. But it's difficult and challenging. The green model is where most organizations and flat church-like structures are tending to model, which is with some hierarchical decision-making within it, such as, you know, a board or whatever, but it still involves the voice of the body of that organization. In the book, sadly, it declares the Roman Catholic Church alongside the army as still in the 21st century in the red model based on pure patriarchy. And so this is the kind of situation we are in reality, with Pope Francis absolutely aware of this and talking about it and trying to step by step, very little by little, move us into transformation and change. So this is difficult for Pope Francis because it's a massive leap, because we're still, as we say, a patriarchal church. And it's in the context and culture of a world that is still actually dominated by patriarchy. If you look at demand in the whole evil, if you like, of human trafficking, demand is coming mainly from the men for sex, cheap, easy. Even today in COVID, we have the massive increase of cybersex with children. And who's buying that sex? Watching rape online, being sold by maybe families from the Philippines who cannot afford to even get food for their family at the moment. How are we allowing that? We've got the whole finance economy around the world. Pretty well the whole world is dominated by men-run boards. Do you know that every single peace-driven organization in the world is actually led by men? There isn't one that's led by a woman. And we may be able to look to Iceland and Finland, who are led by women and who have really transformed their society to look at that gender equality in SDG 5. So they have creches in all their businesses so that the women can have equal access to leadership as all the men. And so many other things are on tap for the women to enable them to ensure their families have 100% what they need to have full integration into the fullness of life, as is their right. But we are not in that century yet where we can say there is gender equality anywhere, really, except these wonderful societies such as Iceland, who is aware and struggling to achieve that goal. So I'm just making sure I stick to my script as I move on fast. So in this slide, we're now going to look at what are we requesting from Pope Francis, from Root and Branches. And these are what you call gender equality, human rights demands. It's not anything extraordinary. So respect, opportunity, equal leadership, governance, respecting our wisdom and knowledge, our skills and gifts as evangelizers, as spiritual and pastoral directors, equal inclusion as social justice innovators, in organizing with a mutual equal approach to development in the church, and equal opportunity in all the ministries. So, Francis, I think we could say, here's the cry. He says, and this was in Evangelium Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, we need to create still broader opportunities for a more incisive female presence in the church, because the feminine genius is needed in all expressions in the life of society and where important decisions are made, both in the church and in social structures. So what I'd like to invite you to do now is, before I move into Pope Francis's way towards an inclusive and status-free church, is for you to reflect on your own understanding of discernment for decision-making. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. My constitutions are also Ignatian. So his way, if you like, is my way, and is the way of millions of people, lay as well as religious, because Ignatian spirituality is for everyone. We just happen to have it as endemic, if you like, or intrinsic in our constitutions. So all of the formation of Pope Francis from the moment he stepped inside the congregation was based on forming him in a life of discernment. And it takes 13 to 15 years for a Jesuit to reach the stage towards final vows. And Ignatius says in the constitutions that by the time a person who enters into this way of life is finally professed, they have no more need for rules, because the way of life is part of their DNA. I believe that it's a life of prayer in discernment, and God takes over, and it just takes time for God to enter into the heart little by little and begin to direct that person totally. So it's a journey of letting go and letting God in to enable you to hear what God is desiring at the heart of yourself. So what is the way of Pope Francis' discernment for decision making? I'd like you to now just write in chat immediately what comes to your head when we say the word discernment. Thank you for that. Mary, is there anybody just wanting to summarize that for Root and Branches?
Well, I noticed that many people are talking about listening, contemplating, reflecting. Yes, listening deeply.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you. So that's a very good word to keep hold of, listening, because indeed it is one aspect of discernment is listening. And it's probably the most essential, because listening with in a manner that you're listening to the other and letting go of yourself altogether in order to listen to the new coming from the dialogue, is the way in which good decision making comes about, because you are actually loving enough to hear the other and to hear the love coming forth from the other in mutual understanding, which is God. Yes.
I noticed that Mark brings in dialogue, so the talking to others.
Yes.
But almost all of a number of these are saying either prayerful or with the Holy Spirit or listening to God, the force outside of ourselves or inside of ourselves, helping us and guiding us.
Thank you, Mary, that's wonderful. So we'll keep these treasures in our hearts, and I'll move on now to look at discernment a little. We're talking about, in the light of women's issues and Root and Branches coming to understand how to walk with Francis towards a status-free and inclusive church, we're looking at a corporate discernment. And this has perhaps a methodology that Ignatius wrote about that is very special, but in both, many of the methodologies have to be in tune. And the key one is this attitude of heart before we begin. And this sincere desire to find God's will together is key. So the key attitudes or values that we hope for are openness and generosity, courage, interior freedom, that's to only desire what God desires, and a habit of prayer for reflection. So we're praying through this discernment individually in order that corporately we discover God's will. And having one's priorities straight. So that's what we'll be looking at, that. What underpins your discernment, and not confusing the end with the means. This is very important, that you don't have your answer before you begin. So the first step for all of this, when we've prayed ourselves with much desire and energy and generosity to be free and open to God's will, is that we need to gather the full information about your chosen deliberation. But that's the key, is what is it? What do you want to discern? So these are just issues I've thrown out. You can read them yourselves, but each time you come to do a corporate discernment, you have to be very clear on what you are hoping to do and why you need therefore a discernment about how you will do it. And I put at the bottom here BBO, which is broad-based organizing. And this is a very important strategy that we use in citizen organizing, and we used it in the Clarences when I was there, and all of our staff in Albania are educated in this. And it comes from a guy in America called Saul Alinsky, and both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were trained by Saul Alinsky in this methodology. And it's very close to discernment because it's about the group doing a brainstorm as to what you really want to do. And then prioritizing the most important to the least for change. And then corporately choosing the most important to discern about. And once you've done that, you can gather the full information about that particular issue, whatever it be, whether it's to do with something to do with canon law, or it's something to do with the fact that you're not on any councils in the church or whatever, but you need the full information. And then the criteria underpinning your discernment. Well, as a Catholic foundation, you will be, I would think, choosing the gospel. So how will this choice help the Catholic Church be more effective in spreading the gospel, being the gospel, find freedom to become who it is called to become as the body of Christ in the world today? When you've gathered the information about your chosen discernment topic, if you like, you then need to put all the pros for doing a particular thing and all the cons on sheets of paper, if you like, up there with your group. And then you need a lot of silence between each, because you'll be gathered for this. And the silence is so important to get in touch with your deepest desiring, which is God's desiring about this issue. And then the listening comes in big time, because each person speaks her truth about this issue, the pros and the cons, and the others listen. And then there's pause for silence to let it go deep, and so on round the whole circle until you might have 10 circles doing this. But the important thing is that you lay it all out and you listen. And then you have this beautiful desire to come to consensus, which is what discernment is about. It's not argument or debate. It's consensus and listening, and the dialogue and the collecting of the information. So in the consensus, there is hopefully a drawing as the dialogue continues and the listening to a kind of strengthening of where the force is moving it to. What is the main thrust to follow in this issue? And it may be you have to go away and have time and more dialogue. But the aim of discernment is that you do come to a consensus. And if you're still in conflict, then the discernment goes on until you reach consensus. And then you come to this confirmation. Now, I think it's really important to know that even when you reach consensus, and you reach confirmation, which is the way of the Ignatian and of the Christian who chooses to go down this path. It's not always right, but it's one of the things you need to do to get to what is right, and you trust it. So in this confirmation process, you're also, as with Ignatius here, they have made a decision that they will stay together and make a vow of obedience. It's one of their first key discernments. but they have to go to the Pope first because they want to make the vow of obedience to the Pope and to be sent on mission. So you may have to do things like this as part of your confirmation process. At the end of the day, and this is Ignatius's words, we did our best and we'd be willing to change our decision if we came to see that it wasn't in fact the wisest and most loving thing to do. It's beautiful. It's whatever helps. Ignatius says that word over and over and over again in the Constitution. It's whatever helps. So you're working towards the greatest good for women in the church of the world of today. So what is the way of Pope Francis? Well, this is an example of discernment. He intended at the Amazonian Synod to have the discernment about married priests and deaconesses, perhaps. That was going on in the process. But we know that in the paper which brought forth the conclusions of that synod, there were no married priests and no deaconesses, despite the need in the Amazon. Why? Because there was terrible conflict in the synod, and they never reached any consensus at all. And it wasn't the time. And that was very clear in all the writing. So what I'd like you to do now is have another little chat time and a break from the input. And I'd like you to write down what you think are the three, just you could use 3 words. 3 words to describe the strategy or the issues, if you like, that Pope Francis is making as he makes his way forward as leader of the Catholic Church. So just let it out. You don't need to spend a lot of time thinking. Just write down in chat those 3 words which you think are the kernel of how he's moving. What is his, where's his concentration?
Just one has stuck with me as to what comments as to what we think Francis is doing, and that's by Julia Dance, saying that he's waiting, praying, longing.
Yes, yes. And I was struck by Mark Primavise's comment, which said too much concentration on the church and not the world, which I thought was really interesting. So, and there's a lot of, you know, good points for debate and for dialogue and discernment in what you've all written. Excellent. So essentially, you can now see whether, you know, this is kind of a summary that I've given as to where he's moving. So it's certainly on a road of discernment. He's also into synodic, and that's what you're into, which is very good. You're having your synod in Bristol. And I think the more I read about Pope Francis' approach to synods, the more the better, because that's discernment. You're moving towards a consensus of where root and branches are being led by God to lead the church as women in Britain. Interconnected always with men, he would say, never go alone, but bring the groups together, women groups, and then alongside the men. It's lovely to see men in this group. I see there's quite a number of men in root and branches, and that's really healthy. Always towards the margins first, and that's been said a lot by you, that yes, if he chooses, he came to Albania first in Europe, and delegation to the local church. Yes, now this is a big thing for you to think about. Do you know, a lot of people would say, have you got a canon lawyer in your midst, root and branches? If not, can you afford to fund somebody to become a canon lawyer so you know what's what and you can speak with authority in the church? So if you're going to be delegated to lead, it's a good thing to know about the church and how it functions, and how therefore you can operate for change, knowing that, as Pope Francis is doing, it's little by little, but it's significant. Understanding not always right the first time. It's not always going to be right the first time, your way of proceeding, and he would know that himself. And always Pope Francis talks about humility, letting go and knowing that others are going to lead him to change, even if he didn't want it. And he has made mistakes. He's the first to admit it. So you're in a broken church, a stumbling church. And like the stumbling church, you too will make mistakes, but it's okay. It's okay, because together we come to the truth. So I'm going to quickly now move towards the end. So when women have the opportunity to fully pass on their gifts to the entire community, the very manner by which society is understood and organized becomes positively transformed by it, managing to better reflect the substantial unity of the human family. By that we mean the globe, the whole of the human context. And Aidan was the one who spoke about that very strongly. And here, you know, we have symbols or even icons, if you like, of Pope Francis's absolutely dedicated commitment, not fast enough for many of us. It's slowly, but in 9 years, there has been a transformation from 385 to 1,016 women working in different scenarios and curias in the Vatican. And we see these amazing women that we know have been given very important jobs by the church. And I'm just trying to check out their names, which I have here. So we have Natalie Beckhart, who was she's the first woman ever to be made an under secretary of the Synod of Bishops. So for the first time in the church ever, in 2021, a woman has been given a vote in a synod. Shocking for today that should be so, only one. But it's a beginning, we can say, and it's up to us to keep the voice ringing so the Pope can hear the Holy Spirit speaking. There should be a movement towards equal opportunity, of course. And here we have also the wonderful Italian Katia Samaria, who's working within the Curia banking system. So we're moving with Pope Francis towards a status-free inclusive church. Even as I speak, I feel the struggle in me, knowing that it's not right. We're knowing that we desire so much more for women in the church. We know that we can transform, be co-creators in this church if only we had opportunity. But we have got some opportunity, and we have to make the most of what we have and open our voices and understand the way forward step by step. But quite honestly, the way forward is together. And we have got a role, but it is together. And the status-free church, whether we be deaconesses, as here we know Pope Francis has set up the commission last year to discern about women deacons in the church, but whether it is with or without clerical women, we're aware that Pope Francis is absolutely incensed and putting huge energy into breaking down clericalism and the culture in the church of clericalism. And this is not going to help with women becoming clerics in the midst of clericalism. And I think this is what he's kind of thinking. And there are two ways of looking at this. But whatever, it is so important that if we're going to be truly feminine, in our approach towards an inclusive and status-free church, that we would move together with Pope Francis. We move together with other women's groups in Britain, not as silos. So your synod in Bristol, open it to the Board of Catholic Women, open it to any other organisations of Catholic women, even of lay women who aren't in organisations, so that all the organisations can be present and you feel connected to that strong voice. That is being church, no status, inclusive, and create spaces, as Pope Francis says, where women can lead, but in ways that allow them to shape the culture of the church. If you want to shape the culture of the church, discern what kind of culture you want and let your synod be in that culture. That's a really important discernment to make. And what do you feel about clericalism? How are you discerning the way you want to go around all of that? And discernment is a listening process and way of life. And it means we remain open and we keep all the doors open, and it's little by little. So finally, we go with Fratelli Tutti, which is all about together. It's about open to everybody, poor and rich, opening your doors as roots and branches to every kind of shape and size of woman, ensuring that you've got that discernment going about that. Are you open? Are you culturally aware of what you want? So together we pray here tonight for that amazing consensus that you will reach to go forward with faith, hope, and love and humility to change the church from now. Thank you.